Hello people, here's my follow-up video to carving an oblique holder. We're going to cut a slot and install a flange in this holder. It's not fully sanded, it's rough sanded, but I think we can use this as our for our demonstration. A few pieces of equipment you will need is obviously brass shim stock. This is 0.012 inches, but 0.010 inches, which is available at most hobby shops, also works. Some pliers. Mostly I'm going to use the linesman's pliers. Metal shears to cut the brass. This is usually available $15 to $20 most hardware stores. A pencil to mark things, some kind of a round. We're not going to use the screwdriver, we just need the round shaft of it, which I'm going to use to make the flange. Now and also of course, most importantly, a cup of tea or coffee, a beverage of your choice. This particular cup is a blend of orange pekoe and Scheherazade from Earl Grey. And with that first sip, we get started. We need to first start with marking the center of this holder shaft. Doesn't have to be exact, but more or less, around the center is nice. This is where we're going to drill the hole that will take the pin which stabilizes the flange. Now, typically, I would clamp it at the edge of the table. If you can see, I have a mirror hanging in my wall. What the mirror does is that when I'm drilling the hole, I can actually sight it from the top to make sure it's aligned lengthwise, and the mirror lets me look at it from the side at the same time, so I know if I am in the horizontally on the other axis, if I'm lined up correctly. But we're not going to use that today. We're just going to take this drill bit, hold it tightly in the linesman pliers, and place it at the spot where we want to make the hole. Press lightly, you don't have to kind of smash it in there, and just make the beginnings of the hole that you're going to drill. Now, this piece of cherry that I have picked for this project is probably the hardest piece of cherry I have ever worked with. I mean, the hardness of this piece of wood rivals some of the ebony that I have carved. So it is very hard. And if I can do it without any power tools or any specialized tools by hand on this piece of cherry, pretty much guaranteed that softer woods would work. The brilliant thing about this particular piece of cherry is that it being so hard, it finishes just brilliantly. It is just a beautiful piece of wood when you apply the finish. So you just keep turning it, applying a slight amount of pressure. Now, the important thing here is to make sure that as you're turning, you're not moving around the axis. You're keeping it more or less at the center axis. After you have a little bit of the hole, you can probably see it'll kind of set itself, and after the first eighth of an inch or so, it'll go in much easier. So you continue doing that. This particular bit seems to be a bit actually, I was using the wrong size. This is the 3/32. So hopefully yeah. So just keep on holding until we have about 1/8 of an inch. It doesn't take long. I guess, you know, watching it would take make it look like a lot of effort, but it's probably 5 minutes, give or take. Probably the first time you do it might take a bit longer, but you know, with the drill it would take seconds. But then the chance of error is much higher when you are, you know, doing it with a drill, because in those few seconds you're either dead on or off. So let's see how much. Okay, so we are a little wobbly. You don't have to be kind of dead center, but that's kind of okay. Okay, so how far have we gone? Just use the back end of the drill to figure that out. Okay, so we've gone in this far, which is, and we need to go another this much distance in. So now that we have the beginnings of a hole, just twisting it becomes much more easier, and it's quite straight. So clean up, continue. Okay, so the beginning part of this hole is a little bit wider than it should have been, because I actually picked out the thicker drill bit. But that shouldn't be too much of a problem, and that's it. I think we have the depth that we need. So this is a little bit more than half an inch. That works, and we can always, you know, drill deeper. And you know, if you turn it in your hand, you can see it's more or less straight. Maybe it could have been a little bit better, but it's not that far off. So now comes the slightly tricky part of following the line of this drill along where you want to cut the slot. Now the slot I like to cut is where the holder falls naturally in your hand, and kind of at the 3/4 of the thumb is the place where it naturally goes. It's kind of important in this holder design. In holders that are completely round, it doesn't actually make any difference, because you can hold it in any orientation around the axis. So I've marked this place, and I'm going to mark it about, again, a little, probably 3/4 of an inch in, and then this mark I extend to the hole that we made with the drill. So these are the marks we're going to cut. We're going to cut lengthways, and this is how deep it would go. Now this is probably the most what should I say, not difficult, but probably testing part of the process, because for most of the process it wouldn't look like you're making any progress, but trust me that you are. I'm going to cut this slot with a knife. Now normally I would do this with a diamond cutting wheel on a Dremel tool, which makes it again a process of a few seconds. But I'm trying to demonstrate how to do it without the use of any specialized tools. So I'll do it by hand. So again, this piece of wood, I've just cut a bit of a channel in it, which provides a bit of stability in holding the piece of wood. And very carefully, the first thing I do is I just mark the line that I'm going to cut. I'm not applying a lot of force, just enough to create kind of a slight, you can barely feel it with the finger, and you definitely cannot see it, but it's just there. That little bit of a channel helps guide the cutting edge. Now this blade is essentially working as a saw with only one tooth, if that makes sense, and which means we have to go back and forth a lot of times. Also, this blade is thinner than the slot that we would need, so we kind of have to make a V channel that will have enough space for the flange to slide into. Now we can always make the channel wider later by sanding it a little bit, or inserting a piece of sandpaper, moving it back and forth. That does the job too. But this is a slow process, it's a laborious process, and after the first 1/8 of an inch or so, it actually doesn't look like you're making any progress at all. So just trust the process and kind of keep moving. Now I like to extend the slot after the first little bit, so I know that I'm going to be lined up with the hole correctly. This this is kind of is important to me, that it's aesthetically pleasing as well as functional. So yep, that's all there is to it. I'll probably speed up this part of the video because it's going to take me about I would say 10 or 15 minutes, since this is a fairly hard piece of cherry. We did a workshop on how to carve your holders, and this is how I had everyone cut slots in their holders, and everybody managed to do it. So it's not something that requires specialized training or skills. Everybody in the workshop managed to cut the slot, and it didn't take them long, probably the same 15 minutes or so that it's going to take me here. So already I'm in. You can see how much of the tip is in there, probably about an 1/8 of an inch, and I have about that much more to go. A sip of tea for fortification, and on we go. You have to be careful not to apply too much force, because force is the enemy of control. So you want to be very controlled, because one slip to the side, your flange is now the slot is now too wide, and the flange will be wobbly. You can fix it by gluing a sliver of wood, but cutting that sliver, adjusting it, gluing it, waiting for the glue to dry, and then kind of sanding the channel open again takes much longer than being patient right now. So a slip will cost you more than patience will. If you happen to have a clamp, which I do, it just makes the process a little easier, because it's you can use the clamp to hold your holder. So I'm going to do that right now in the interest of speed, but you can do it without the clamp just as easily. It's just going to take a little bit longer and maybe tire you a little bit, but I'm pretty sure you get the idea, so there's no point in spending that time while I'm recording this. So basically just cutting through along that line, making sure I'm lined up with the hole that I want to reach. Now you might want to tilt this slot down a little bit. Sometimes in some holders they do that, particularly if you are going to install a Bullock style flange. That flange is, the design of that flange doesn't allow it to be kind of twisted up like a kind of a standard brass flange. So if the flange is cut at a slight angle, it helps put the nib at a lower angle to the paper, making it less prone to catching. So this is the time right now where it looks like I'm not making any progress, and this is where you need to be patient and trust yourself. Do not go side to side. Even the weakest of woods is strong enough to break off the tip of your knife. In this case, I'm just using a utility knife, so the blades are easily replaceable. If you are using a nicer knife, you don't want that tip to break off. Okay, this front part is a bit hard. Okay, I'm just making the front part a bit wider so I can slide through, see a bit of slivers of wood are coming out, which is exactly what we want. So I am putting the cutting edge at a very slight angle, just so that I'm cutting against the sides rather than just one very thin slot, and it will help me slide in the sandpaper to allow the slot to be made slightly wider. This kind of slot, actually, to be honest, is more accurate. Like the way I'm cutting it right now is more accurate than the slots I make with the diamond wheel, but I just cannot afford to spend this much time per holder when I'm making them commercially. It's just the amount of time. Well, someone has to pay for the amount of time, and I don't think this kind of is the best use of that time. I'd rather spend that time on other sort of okay, so here is the orientation of the slot. This is kind of how deep we have gone so far, about this much. So we are this deep, so about halfway there, but actually from this point it's almost reaching the point where I'm going to cut through. Okay. There you go. Okay, I can almost feel it poking through on the back end, so I'll concentrate on the front half. And be careful when you feel yourself applying a bit too much force and getting slightly frustrated, just stop and have a sip of your tea. You'll end up with better work. Now, for most people, you're just going to do one or two or a few holders, and I actually cut in the beginning when I was even making holders for other people. This is how I would cut the flange, because I just was making only a few. Now that I have to make more than a few on a regular basis, I've stopped using this method, but for the first, I guess, few years, I wasn't doing it on a kind of strictly commercial basis, so this is how I did it, and it worked fine. So it's, and once again, this is a very hard piece of cherry, so it's taking actually longer than it would for most other woods, or even another piece of cherry wouldn't be this hard to cut the flange in. So probably won't be listening to most of this, as I would have sped it up, because I'm pretty sure you don't feel like listening to me babble on. I'm about cutting slots for 15 minutes. I don't know how long it has been, probably less than 15 minutes. Sometimes it feels different than it is. Okay, so we are nearing our goal. Okay, these are the slivers from the side, I guess, walls of the slot, as I cut from with a slight angle, so we have a bit of. And by the way, saw blades are also not exactly in line, they are slightly offset from each other, so that's why you have the curve of the saw. The curve of the saw is the reason you have the curve is because of that offset. So the teeth of a saw are not exactly in line one behind the other. One cuts slightly to the left or right of the one in front of it, so on. And that's what I'm trying to create with the blade cutting at slightly different angles, but very slight, like you barely even feel it. Okay, so almost through. Now this last bit I'm usually very careful with, because it could be, because I don't want to kind of cut through the other side of the hole for the stabilizing pin, because that just looks ugly and we don't want ugly. Okay, so cleaning up the inside a little bit as much as we can, and we are, I think, through. Yeah, mostly through. Just need to widen that bit a little bit. Okay, so we are through all the way, and there is not much that the knife can do. So I don't know if anyone was keeping track. This is pretty much as long as it takes, and we have cut the slot. This was the most difficult part. So the slot has been cut, we can go all the way through. Now I usually use a piece of sandpaper. This is just 150 grit sandpaper that I fold in half, and I insert it in. It will be a little tight, but you go back and forth a few times and it will loosen up nicely. Again, patience is key. There is no point in forcing it. Okay, that's all it took, and we have a nice tidy flange slot. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Okay, so now for the flange itself. Now this is if you've done this part, you've done the hardest part. Making the flange is a little tricky in the sense that you have to use a bit of dexterity, but it's not hard in the in any way, shape, or form. I'm just looking for a nib. I'll probably use okay. Here's a zebra G nib. This is what we're going to use to make the flange. So I like to cut. This is about, I think, 5 centimeters, maybe a bit more, and I like it about 1 centimeter wide, about half an inch. Or maybe less. It will take you a little bit of practice to cut straight and parallel. So until then, you can just use a ruler, draw a line, and cut along that. The next step after you have this is to just bend it into two. I use these needle nose pliers. These are Husky, came in a set, was I think $8 or something. And the thing I like about this is that it has no teeth, so it doesn't mark my brass when I flatten it. However, if you don't have that and you just have regular needle nose pliers like these, just apply a bit of masking tape and it will do the same thing. It will and not mark your brass, and I just don't like that. Now the next step is to introduce a curve in which the nib will sit, and that curve is where this comes in. So we basically need to just hold it in place again with a pair of pliers. Just hold the flange in place and bend it around this shaft. See, now this we need a little bit more, so I'm going to do it at an angle that's, I don't know if you'll be able to see it as easily, but and once again a bit of masking tape helps with, well, I don't have any masking tape on it now, so we'll have a flange with a few marks on it, but you can go around and get a flange like this. Okay, so this is actually a bit too wide, so find a screwdriver that's a bit thinner or a drill bit even. Anything, you just need a shaft to turn it around in. So once you have something like this, now you open it up. And in this open slot now that we opened up, this is where we put our nib and kind of hold it with our hands. Now the nib is in there, it's kind of stuck pretty hard, and we can clamp it with our pliers. Careful being like the top edge of the flange and the top edge of the pliers to be parallel to each other, and we bend it back up a little bit beyond 90 degrees. So this is what you end up with, and this is your flange essentially in action. Now at this point you can do any adjustment that is needed. If the nib is going in too hard, needs to be loosened up, whatever, you can make the adjustment with this. Now one point here, it's a bit counterintuitive. If the nib is very loose, you want to make this curve flatter. That will tighten the nib, and vice versa. If the nib is going in too tight, making the curve, making it curve more will make it slide in a bit easier. So that is a little counterintuitive, but that's the way it works. Now to cut, which angle to cut it at, I generally go with an angle that would be a bit shallower than most commercially available, because that well, first of all, it matches what the Zenarian holders were angled at, and also I find that it just works better for most people. So this is the angle, and I'll mark the place where I made the hole for the slot. So with that marked and the back end, I kind of know what the angle is, and also I'm going to cut a curve on it. So these are the marks, I don't know if you can see, that are made on it, on the flange. I'll now just cut off the flange at that angle, and also this little corner, I don't like it sticking out so much, so I'll introduce a bit of a curve. Now this part of the flange is now quite sharp, so I will sand it off a bit until it's nice, and I'll usually sand it, you know, a lot more than this, but now is the time. Now I'll just check to make sure that the flange sits in correctly, the nib is lined up properly, and that's usually best done by holding it along its axis at the edge of a desk or something and seeing that the tip lines up, and it does. So this is a nicely lined up flange. Now, in order to make it sit nicely inside the slot that we just made, we're going to take these pliers and bend the very ends of this flange slightly, so we have this kind of opening, and these little, I don't know what they're called technically, but these kind of wings hold the flange in place. You can play with how wide you want to make them, and the very end of this these bends is sharp, so I just cut off the very tip so it doesn't bite into the wood as I slide it in. So now I just take the flange and slide it in. It will take a bit of wiggling, and it might not be the easiest thing you do, but you know, you wiggle it into place, and there you go, Zenarian style flange. And if you have done it correctly, it's actually quite stable. It doesn't wiggle. You can always slide it out, replace it with another one if you want something for a nib that is very different. And if you want to stabilize it further, which I do, although this is quite firmly in place, you can take a piece of toothpick, shave it off a little bit if it needs to be, and just insert it in here, cut off the end, and now you have a stabilized flange installed in a holder. I'm not going to install it permanently. Well, it's not permanent, because even if the pin is installed, you can pull it off, but I'm not going to go through that because this holder still needs to be finished. It's only rough sanded, but that's how you install a flange using nothing but hand tools and you know, basic things you have lying at home. Pretty much the only thing specialized that you need is these shears, which really aren't that much of an investment if you're going to make yourself a holder. So there you go, installing a flange without any specialized tools. Now the angle of this flange is about, I think, 50 degrees from the axis of the holder. Now in some cases you might have holders that are very thick, and the flange will stick out a lot more, and it won't really be along the the tip of the nib won't be along the axis. Well, that's actually not such a bad deal. Under no circumstances should the nib come to the right of this axis. That will just mess up your writing and balance. A little bit to the left of it is actually okay. It doesn't really interfere with your writing as long as the angle is fine. Do not angle it too much, because what that means that when you're writing, you'll have to change the angle of the paper, or the angle of, well, the angle of the paper to kind of line up the nib slit and your slant guides. And you don't want that. You don't want a holder to have a kind of a different setup. You want all your holders more or less in the same setup. So maintain this thing, and if you need to, just take off the end of the holder a little bit. Cut a wedge off at the very tip, so the holder can be inserted a little in. So you'll still have a very wide grip, but the front of it doesn't have to be wide. You're not going to grip the holder from there. So just, you know, cut a slight kind of wedge shape off over here, and then the slit on very wide holders, and then the flange could come in a little bit to allow it to be, the tip of the nib to be lined up with the axis. So there it is. Flange all done by hand. It didn't take too long, did it? Well, I'm looking forward to your feedback, and please do share your projects. And if anyone follows these instructions, I would love to know the holders that you've carved, and you know, love to see pictures if possible. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Bye bye.